The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, normally the NDP leader is well worth ignoring, but I just can't help myself. He says that the Prime Minister acts like he has no power to stop all of these greedy CEOs from ripping off consumers. Who else has the power? Well, the guy that joined the government 2 years ago. He's been in power during the worst food price inflation in over 4 decades. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that his carbon tax coalition is nothing more than an anti-competitive price-fixing scheme that is costing Canadians at the grocery store?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, we see that the Conservative Party's opposition to the price on pollution is ideological and not concrete, because their opposition to the price on pollution means they don't care about fighting against climate change. Even as wildfires are already raging in different parts of the country, they have no plan to fight against climate change. And they do it in the name of affordability while ignoring that the Parliamentary Budget Officer actually showed that 8 out of 10 Canadian families do better with the money put in their pockets from the Canada Carbon Rebate than it costs them with the price on pollution.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has concluded that 60% of Canadians pay more in carbon tax costs than they get back in the phony rebates. 100% of middle-class Canadians pay more than they get back in the phony rebates. And now the Prime Minister wants to quadruple the tax, all at a time when he's preparing to hand over power to carbon tax Carney. Will the Prime Minister confirm if carbon tax Carney will follow through on his plan to hike the tax to 61 cents a litre?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed that 8 out of 10 Canadian families in jurisdictions where the carbon price federal backstop applies do better off with more money in their pockets through the Canada Carbon Rebate checks that land in their bank accounts 4 times a year. That's money in their pockets that goes to the cost of groceries, the cost of rent, the cost of everything they need to raise their families. That is money in their pockets that the Leader of the Opposition would take away because of its ideological crusade against climate action.
Then I have Shefton.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Prime Minister's wacko carbon tax obsession is costing Canadians not just at the pump, but it raises the cost of home heating, of groceries, because of course if you tax the farmer who produces the food and the trucker who ships the food, you tax all who buy the food. It's a housing tax because it raises the cost of building materials that go into homes. With the report out today that 25% of young people had to go to a food bank in just 3 months, will he accept the common sense Conservative bill to take the tax off the farmers who produce our food?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition continues to make that argument even though he knows full well that farm fuels are 95% exempt from the price on pollution right across the country, Mr. Speaker. That is something that he ignores because of his ideological opposition to take any action in fighting climate change. Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you, in Conservative ridings right across the country, people are worried about droughts, people are worried about floods, people are worried about wildfires that are more and more severe. Canadians need a clean plan to fight climate change, which is something he hasn't put forward while we are fighting climate change and putting money in people's pockets.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's carbon tax applies on barns, on grain drying, on fertilizers, on off-farm vehicles. It costs literally tens of thousands of dollars for many individual farmers, all of which gets passed on. But the Prime Minister, instead of defending his taxes, resorted to a really wacko and unhinged claim that if Canadians just paid more taxes, there would be suddenly less fires. I thought that water and not taxes put out fires. But maybe the Prime Minister can clarify, how high would his tax have to go for forest fires to stop?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are facing the impacts of the extreme weather events that come from climate change that are unfortunately getting worse and worse every year. That is why our government from 2015 onwards has stepped up in the fight against climate change, because not only are we reducing Canada's emissions to the lowest level outside the pandemic in 25 years, but we're also stepping up in the jobs and technological innovations that the world needs to successfully fight climate change. We will continue to fight climate change, Mr. Speaker, and put more money in people's pockets while he sits with his arms crossed and
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He didn't answer my question. Now he says that his taxes are going to make Canada a high-tech wonderland. Before, his claim was that it was going to stop forest fires. It's him that made the link, not me. Obviously, I think the link between the two is absolutely ridiculous, because his tax is not an environmental plan. It's a money-collecting plan. It's a plan of government greed. So I'll ask the question again. He wants to hike the tax to 61 cents a litre. If it gets to that high and people are all starving in the streets, will that stop the forest fires?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in the Leader of the Opposition's desire to make clever rhetorical points, he actually completely ignores the basic facts. The price on pollution is revenue neutral for the federal government. That means the money that comes in for the price on pollution, for the carbon tax, gets returned to the jurisdictions, and is why the Parliamentary Budget Officer found 8 out of 10 Canadian families in jurisdictions where the carbon price applies do better with the Canada carbon rebate that comes in 4 times a year than the price on pollution costs them. That's a plan to fight climate change and put money in people's pockets.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to be too clever for the Prime Minister, but he's the one who made the argument that high taxes would stop forest fires, and now he can't tell us how high the tax would go to put all the fires out. He went on now to say that his tax is revenue neutral. Well, you don't have to be too clever to read the government's own published documents, which shows that he has collected $2 billion more in taxes than he's given back in rebates. That's why 100% of middle-class Canadians pay more than they get back. So once again, will he tell those middle-class people how high the tax would have to go for the fires to stop?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we just saw is climate denialism at its finest. The fact is, as global emissions rise, as carbon intensity in the atmosphere increases, extreme weather events like wildfires, droughts, and floods will simply become more and more frequent. Now, his plan is to do nothing, Mr. Speaker, and let future generations fend for themselves. Our plan is not only to reduce our emissions, but to create the solutions that the world needs while we lead on fighting climate change, bringing down emissions, and growing